He asked me to stand on stage so that you can see me and the screen a little bit better. Is that okay, Benji? Good. So if you have any questions at all, please raise your hand, okay? I prefer to be interactive rather than just a monologue, which can be boring. So we talked about preparation for parents and candidates, and preparation, of course, is really, really important. And you can begin when you're really young, or couples are first blessed, like I suggested. It's never, never too late. Never, never, never too late. We have a lot of our young people who are in their 30s who are still looking for a match or beginning to look for a match. So please don't be discouraged if you think it's too late for me. It's not ever the case. So if you have a specific circumstance, let's talk about it. But there is a match for every single person. So we'll talk more about that too. So we talked about preparation. One of the points in preparation and one of the tools is called the Matching Plan Worksheet. If you turn to page 5 in the handout that you have, on page 5 there's a booklet, or at least a worksheet called the Matching Plan Worksheet. And this is an interactive tool that can really help in the communication process. So it's a tool, and it's there for your use, and all of those questions you may not answer. But this is especially a chance for candidates to talk about what they feel, what they want in the matching process. So at the very top of that worksheet it says, candidate fills out a worksheet, and mom and dad fill out a separate one. So this is one of the things that can really help in the communication process. And like I said, all of those questions you may not feel you need to answer, but this is a way that young people can communicate to their parents what they want, what they don't want, how they feel in the matching process. And sometimes it's a lot easier to write it down rather than just try to verbalize it. Some of us don't speak well. We don't share what's in our hearts always. So this is a good chance it's a good tool to help with the communication process. So you can go through that. Just some of the points. I want you to just take time when you have a chance to go through it yourself, and even make notes today if you're there, if you're already in that point. So creating a matching team is the first question, and that can be really helpful. If you have siblings who are blessed, or that you feel connected to, one of your siblings could be a really good member of the team. You might want a matching supporter, and a matching supporter, by the way, is not required for blessed children. Families do not need to use a matching supporter. Matching supporters can be helpful, but it's not required. First generation candidates do need to have a matching supporter if their parents are not in the movement. We'll talk a little later about members that join with their parents. And in that case, of course, the parents will be involved in the matching process. Of course. But if their parents are not in the movement, then a matching supporter is required. So creating a matching team could include a pastor, it could include a matching supporter, or a sibling, or a brother or sister that you know and trust. Exploring life goals, core values, and the character of the candidate. This question is important because if the young person that you're working with, our young people perhaps want to be completely dedicated to the church, as in becoming a pastor or a leader in the church, or work church, you wouldn't want to match them to somebody who's kind of on the periphery, who maybe even does not like our church. I think there are people like that, right? We have a lot of problems in our movement, and we know many of our young people are kind of separated from our movement, and we really want to find matches and to support them in the matching process, but they certainly wouldn't be happy being matched or blessed to a pastor, for example. So life goals, core values, those things are very important to evaluate in each person, and realize where they're coming from and what they want in a possible match. So life goals and core values and the character. Identify areas for the candidate to work on. We're all a work in progress, even mom and dad. Right, mom and dad? Yes. You know, thank God we can continue to grow. I don't know about spirit world. Can we grow in spirit world, Dr. Hendricks? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe. I hope so.
Yes.
Yes. There's lots of stuff to learn, lots of things that we can change in our character, and even in spirit world, hopefully we'll continue to develop and become better people. But certainly in the physical realm, and as we're preparing for the matching, our single brothers and sisters need to consider how they need to become better people. Right? How can we continue to grow and become the best person that I can be? So that's one important point to evaluate. Identify deal breakers. I mentioned earlier the young man that I worked with, that a deal breaker for him would be somebody whose first language is not English. So that's what we call a deal breaker. He wanted somebody who his first language is English so that he can communicate freely and clearly. Now, I have another candidate who is studying Japanese, and he wants a person who is from Japan, or at least their first language is Japanese. He's living in Canada, so for him, that's his goal. He wants a Japanese match. So each person is a little bit different, but what are their deal breakers, and what do they really, really want in a match? Those are really important points to consider. And the matching plan worksheet is an area where those things can be listed and evaluated. Consider important questions to ask a potential partner. Those could be levels of purity or kinds of addiction, if they have had any challenge with addiction with pornography or drugs or alcohol, those kinds of things. And sometimes a matching supporter can help to ask those sometimes sensitive questions. So if your candidate or you as a candidate have specific things that you require in a match, and maybe they're a little bit sensitive to ask, you can contact a matching supporter who can ask on your behalf. So and a matching supporter can call up the other family or connect with them and say, I'm working with a family, no names are necessarily required, I'm working with a family whose daughter has retained her purity and she would like to be matched with somebody of a similar level of purity. Would your son be available for a discussion? Not has your son had sex, right? The intent is not to be confrontational, but we want to find out if the young person has had some kind of relationship, or if there's a deal breaker that would not be conducive to a relationship. So the matching supporter will ask the family, is your son available for a matching discussion? And the family then can say no. They don't have to explain anything. The matching supporter then reports back to the other family that they work with that their son is just not available. Does that make sense? So in other words, a matching supporter can help with some questions that may be, a little bit sensitive. So important questions to ask potential partners. Ideas of where to find potential candidates. We do recommend the matching websites, but not all of our brothers and sisters, our candidates, want to have a profile on a matching website. So where then do we look for possible matches? We'll talk about some options in a few minutes. So that, of course, is one of the questions that the candidate would need to specify. I don't want to be on a matching website, or, yeah, I'm open to that. So that's important. Clarify the desired level of involvement of the candidate. I mentioned earlier our son who didn't want to offer any input. He just said, yeah, whatever you think. Well, that makes it a little more difficult for parents. But one of the things that we really, really, really encourage is for young men and women to specify how involved they want to be. And if they want to just leave it up to mom and dad, and that happens, then that's good. And if not, that's good too. But how involved do they want to be? So that's a really important question. And this is the tool, the matching plan worksheet, that can be really helpful for your family, hopefully, to help with the communication process. So candidates, when you're making out when you're completing the matching plan worksheet, it's very important to be honest, to really be clear, and to pray or reflect whatever you do, meditate, whatever is appropriate for you, and to take whatever time you need to fill out whatever questions you feel are important for you in the process. So you're communicating with your parents. So what you write down on this matching plan worksheet is communicating to your parents. Stay in good communication with your parents. Ask any questions that you need to, and consider the desired degree of involvement that you want in your matching plan. So this is for you. These are our young people. This is your process, and your mom and dad are there to facilitate. And by the way, the term matching is kind of a misnomer. It's kind of the wrong term, because we don't really match our children. We facilitate, we work together. So parents don't dominate and say, this is how we're going to do it. We did try that, by the way. We tried that in the past and it didn't work so well. So now we really want an interactive process, a family-centered process to support in the matching process. And of course, for candidates, it's important that we share with parents where we're at and what we want and don't want in the process. Be honest with yourself, parents, be honest with yourself, with God and your candidate. So parents, when you're filling out your matching plan worksheet, it's really important, of course, to be clear and to be really honest. If you feel this is necessary for my son or daughter, then write it down and share it. But hopefully you'll be open to hearing what your candidate is saying and reporting and asking for. Stay in good communication, learn to listen. If you're not a good listener, it's really important to practice and to learn and to become a good listener, especially in the matching process, because it's a communication that is just really important, that will make it successful as you're able to communicate and connect with each other. Clarify the desired level of involvement of your candidate, and share suggestions according to the matching plan. So this is the parent part of it. So once parents and candidates have completed the matching plan worksheet, then we recommend they go for coffee or sit down over a cup of tea, whatever works, and combine them into one matching plan. So discuss the options and compromise and work it out so that everybody is happy with the plan. And parents, I recommend that your son or daughter be subject. If they don't feel that they want to unite with what you want in the plan, they're the ones that have to live with it, right? They're the ones that have to be responsible. So I really encourage you to unite with them, not just convince them or say this is the way it's going to be and dominate the process. It's really important to respect where they're at. So that's the formation stage. Any questions so far? Okay, so there is a matching plan worksheet there, as you've seen. There also is, I'll show you on the BFM website where to find a matching plan worksheet, and you can print out more or download onto your PC and complete it there. Josh, you had a question?
Yeah, question. Some people didn't get the handouts,
Oh,
so I just
Okay.
I'm gonna print some more out. How many do we need?
how many handouts do we need? Who did not get one of those?
Everybody needs one?
Well, one per family.
One per family?
Yeah, that's one per family is enough.
Every family got one?
Does everybody know what we're talking about?
I think everybody has
That's
one.
an okay. And I'll show you where you can print out more as well on the website, so that you can print out another one or two, however many you need. So one per family. This gives you an overview of what is there for the worksheet itself. Okay, so finding a candidate. This is the exciting stage, right? This is what I would call the growth stage. And here are the possible sources to consider. See number one, candidate's suggestion. So in the past, we didn't think the candidate, they shouldn't have any input. That was satanic sometimes. But it's not. God can work through our children. Thank God God can work through our children. Right? Sometimes a lot better than He worked through us first generation as parents. So it's really, really important as parents that we respect where our sons or daughters are coming from. That if they have somebody that they feel could be a good match, somebody they feel connected to, it's really important that we respect that. Listen to them, and then follow up with the parents of that young man or woman. Very, very important. Very important. And in fact, we encourage our older young people to participate in Top Gun or 24+ retreats. You probably have heard of those. And we encourage young people to reach out and meet possible matches. And then come back, mom and dad, to the family, discuss it together, and decide how to proceed. So it's really, really important that our young men and women are received, that their input, their hearts are, we as parents are sensitive to their hearts and where they're coming from. So they may have the best match that they really want to be connected with. So as parents, it's important that we connect with them and find out. Parents may also have a suggestion. So discuss it and go through, the pros and cons and do the outreach according to the family matching plan. Matching supporters or someone else on the team, on your matching team, might have a suggestion as far as a possible match. So these are all ways that we can find possible matches for our sons and daughters, for our singles. Use the matching plan, the matching websites, we'll talk more about those. They are tremendous resources. Participate in events, and that means Top Gun or NGA, some of the activities, the Cranes Club, those kinds of activities can be places where young people can interact and possibly meet a potential candidate for the matching. So participate in the various events. Any questions make sense so far? So the online matching websites, there is a question?
If there's someone like, because when you're taught from a young age to look at each other like brothers and sisters, and I had a friend, she was on the church program, the weight team, and she ended up getting matched to this guy who was also on the weight team. And I don't know when their brother-sister kind of friendship turned into something more. And I was just kind of wondering, how do you, evolve that? I always went, and I'll probably ask her how she did that with not her now husband, but, just how you kind of transition between brother and sister to a couple kind of attraction.
That's a really good question. Did everybody understand the question? So as we grow in our movement, we encourage everybody to be a brother and sister. So not to look at the opposite sex as a possible matching candidate, but sometimes, when we work together or do volunteer work together or connect with each other, we just feel kind of a connection, and naturally we connect better with some people than others. So how then, if we feel a connection to a possible candidate, to a person of the opposite gender, how do we transition then into the matching and ultimately, hopefully, the blessing? That's a really good question. So the answer to that is not just straightforward, but one of the things that we encourage is a long discussion period to consider a possible matching. One of my wife's nephews, his parents were looking for a possible match, and his parents went to him and suggested a young lady, and he said, "What? She's one of the guys. She's one of the bros." They were just good friends. They knew each other. They essentially grew up together in the same community. And so it was, a bit of a challenge for him in the beginning, but then when they considered it worked out fine. The key thing is to transition from brother and sister. We recommend a 7-month period of communication. I'll talk a lot more about that coming up. And that time period is designed and intended for a young couple to get to know each other, the good and the bad points, and then after a good 7 months of communication, then to decide whether or not they want to go ahead and be matched. They can, of course, quit the conversation at any point, and I'll talk more about that too, but we also encourage singles until the time of the blessing, their brother and sister. So it's not really just a straightforward answer to transition, but if there's somebody in your heart that you feel you might want to be connected to in that way, then it's important that you resolve that. You understand either they're matched or blessed or not available before you can actually move on to find someone else. So I don't know, does that help? Yeah, it's kind of a process, and it's not like first ABC, do this, and then DF, like that. It doesn't work that way. So we'll talk more about the communication phase, which is really, really important. So the matching websites are a really tremendous resource to help to find candidates. And on at least 2 of the matching websites that we'll talk about, 3 of them, you can put your profile on hold so nobody can see it. So it's not available, but you may want to develop a profile and work on it over a period of time. And if you really don't want your profile visible on a matching website, keep it on hold, and then your parents can show it to another couple or another family when the time comes. So the matching websites are a good resource. There are 4 of them. Matchbook, which is hosted at blessedfamilies.org. The international matching website, there are 2 of those now. Sorry. bfmatch.org. And that one was designed, it was released about a year ago. It was originally intended to replace the old international matching website, which is bcmatching.org. But there were some communities, I won't name them, Korea and Japan, no, I won't name them. There were some communities that felt it was not conducive to their membership, so they never used it. BF Match is an international matching website mostly used by Western members, and there are a growing number of people on there. There are Koreans and Japanese, but mostly Korean and Japanese members, singles, use BC Matching, which is the original international matching website. So both of those 2 international sites are hosted by the BFD in Korea. But they're both very, very good websites. OMS is hosted at chunogok.org, and it's independent of the church or the Family Federation. It's hosted by Anne-Marie Mylar, some of you know her, in Delaware. That website is available for blessed children as well as first-generation members. The other matching websites are all for BCs. So OMS has a separate module for blessed children, a separate module for first-generation candidates, another module for associate members like ACLC or ministers that are connected to our movement and maybe single and looking for a possible match to go to blessing. Also, there is a module for special needs. So we do have special needs children in our movement, of course, and this is a website that can help to facilitate a possible matching of our special needs brothers and sisters. So special needs, just in case you don't know, we used to call it treasures of heaven. Those are young men and women who may have emotional challenges, they may be autistic, they may have a physical disability, something like that that is, it's unique and a little bit challenging for them in the regular matching process. So that's OMS, the chunogok.org website. Yes.
Are the candidates on the websites fairly well divided between male and female?
Well, there's a good question. Excuse me one second. No. The question, in case you didn't hear it, is are there as many brothers as sisters on the matching websites? And I just said the answer. There probably are 30-40% more sisters. Maybe in some websites, maybe 50% more women than there are men on those websites. So let's say if there's 200 women and 50 brothers, that's 25% more or less, right? You only need 1 man, sisters. You only need 1. So out of those 50, I bet you can find somebody that will work, right? So even though brothers tend to be ready later than women, still, You only need one. So there is a preponderance of young ladies on the websites in general, more than brothers. So, does that answer the question? Yeah. I'm sure that there are more reasons that I'm not aware of why there are more women than men, but anyway, that's the way it is. So for our first generation candidates, you can use OMS. That's the first generation matching website in North America, and it's gaining popularity around the world as well for first gen especially. You had a question?
Oh, I was just gonna say, because there's more women, is that basically why?
Are there more women?
Yeah, and men, or are they just?
No, I think that men are just ready later, or just don't feel they're ready. I mean, I don't know. Maybe some of our young people have some insights, but yeah.
Yep, it's true.
Sorry?
It's true.
Yeah,
Yep.
men are ready later. Yeah, you know, one of the things that young men, one of the things that they really want before they go into a matching process is to be, you know, to have a career, a job, some kind of security, and that's a male thing. And not everybody feels that, but generally speaking, men mature later, we know that, and so therefore appear later perhaps on the websites. So, but don't be discouraged if you got girls, because there's lots of good guys out there. So these are some other areas where I think I mentioned already, the 24 plus retreats. We host those a couple of times a year. And the next one is not scheduled yet, but we're working on that. And if you know of somebody who wants to take over organizing these, ideally a young blessed couple, our brother David Young has done this for a few years, and he's resigned from that post at this point, so we need somebody to take over for him for the 24 plus retreat. So this is a retreat where young singles are invited to a retreat, and there are some interactive activities that they can get to know each other and possibly find a match. And they've been successful in helping young people to find a possible match. So it says 24 plus, and the reason is because our target age group is over 24 years of age, because we feel they're a little older, more mature, perhaps more, I don't know, able to find a match, but hopefully they will involve their parents, because it's very, very important that God is involved in the process, and in order to do that, mom and dad need to be part of the process. So 24 plus retreats, so BCs and first generation are both invited to those retreats. Matching supporters, we have a lot of matching supporters in North America, but we also have interactive webinars where matching supporters from around the world can introduce their candidates to each other in a live webinar. So we have 4 of them a year for 24 plus BCs, and we have 4 separate ones for first generation singles. So matching supporters meet together online and introduce their candidates to other matching supporters. And those also have resulted in possible matches as well, and ultimately blessings. So those are some tools that are available to help with the matching process. So candidates, preparing for the matching, it's really important that you are ready, that you feel ready, and that you complete a profile if you feel like you're ready to get into the matching process and you're going to use the matching websites. So mom and dad never complete a profile for their son or daughter. This is up to the candidates to do. And if a candidate is reluctant to do it, perhaps they aren't really ready to be in the matching process, maybe. There might be other reasons too, but mom and dad should never do it on behalf of their son or daughter. So that's important. Consider profiles on all websites. Very often people ask me, well, which website is best? Well, each one we'll look at this afternoon, each one is a little bit different. I recommend using all of them because that gives greatest exposure in the matching process. So if you have a young lady and there are 50 brothers on Matchbook, chances are there are 50 different ones on BF Match. and maybe 30 different ones on OMS. Actually, there are fewer than that, but on OMS. But the point is, the greatest exposure. Mom and dad ideally go with them. And you're there, you're part of the team. So that's one reason, to support them in this endeavor. The other thing is that very often mom or dad can tell if there is a chemistry there. With our youngest son, I flew across the country with him. Unfortunately, my wonderful wife, who has more intuition than I, was unable to come. But anyway, I'm like as intuitive as a brick or a block of wood. So you can do it, no matter where you're at in your intuitiveness. I recommend that you go with your son or daughter and just watch the young couple. It doesn't mean look over their shoulder. It just means, participate with them in whatever activities they're doing. You'll be able to tell whether or not the chemistry is there. So with our youngest son, we flew across the country, and he's an engineer, so he doesn't talk a lot. He's kind of shy, but anyway, he doesn't initiate a lot, so I kind of have to draw out where he's at. So what did you think? How did you feel about this? Initially, he said, well, there were some things that were a little bit of a challenge. Oh, okay, like what? Or how did you feel? Anyway, kind of encourage him, try to get him talking a little more. Eventually, it turned out that there were some challenges that in the beginning, he thought he could deal with. But then as he got to know this young lady, wonderful young lady, as he got to know her a little bit more, he felt he just maybe would have a really, really hard time in dealing with those habits or issues or those character traits that she had. And I felt the same. Like I said, I'm not very intuitive, but I could see, they got along well, brother and sister, good friends, they communicated, they were able to chat and share with each other, but somehow the chemistry wasn't there. There wasn't a spark, that really connected them. So, we talked about it, and I respected where he was coming from. Then when we got back home, we talked to Mom about it, and all together decided that we would end the discussion. So they had been communicating for a good period of time, getting to know each other, and we felt that it just was not going to work. It was not the best possible match. So right away we contacted the mother, who we had been dealing with, and we said, we just feel this is not the best match for our children. So we want to end the discussion. That's all you have to say. So it's not difficult to end the discussion. Be really sensitive, of course. Really, really sensitive. Non-confrontational or judgmental in any way. And if you can offer the family some suggestion as to why it was an issue, we found out that your daughter had done drugs in the past or something like that, and anyway, whatever it is, if it can be constructive and loving and sensitive and can help them in the matching process as they continue, then you can share that. But otherwise, we just don't feel it's the best match. So we ended that discussion, and anyway, now he's happily blessed with another young lady. So that's the end of a good story. Once you introduce a candidate to your son or daughter, you've done your homework, you've done your screening, you've done the diligence, and now it's up to your son or daughter. So don't take it back. Don't take it back. Now you give them the responsibility. And it's important that they realize that, and they take whatever time it takes for them to decide whether or not to continue or not. If you find out later in a discussion that there is some very serious issue that you were not aware of, then you can talk to your son or your daughter about it and say, here's what we found out, and we talked to the pastor so we know it's true, or whatever. How do you feel about that? Is that going to be okay? Can you work with that? Is that going to be okay with you? If your son or daughter feels it's okay, they may want to talk to the other candidate about it, whatever. But the point is, it's still up to the candidate to decide. And if they feel they cannot do it, they cannot handle it, then mom and dad need to contact the other parents and end the discussion. And when you contact the parents, it's also important not to say, my son wants to end the discussion. but our family, because this is a family relationship, right? It's a family process. So we've talked with our son, and our family feels that this is not the best match for your son and our daughter, or vice versa. I forget which one I was talking about. But you understand? So it's our family. Don't put it on your son or daughter. That's important. Okay, so that's the introduction phase. The communication phase is just a continuation, and during this time there are brother and sister. This is really important to understand. I got a report a few weeks ago that one of our matching supporters apparently was telling matched couples that they can do anything in their physical relationship except have a sexual relationship. That is absolutely not true. Absolutely is not true. Adam and Eve fell, right? They had a sexual relationship prematurely. So until we receive the blessing, we're brother and sister. So it's very important that we understand really, really clearly. In your booklet, it talks about this physical closeness. So that's really, really important. We've had some really serious issues where young couples have gotten too close prematurely, and it has consequences. It becomes a problem. So that's really important to understand. Brother and sister. So relationship building questions in the back of the matching handbook, I think it's Appendix 3. There are some questions there that can be confrontational, but if you share with the other parents or the other candidate, then you can go through the list of questions and talk about them with each other so that everything comes out, everything is clear. And in the discussion period, it's very important that you share things that you're not so proud of, struggles you've had, mistakes you've made. Even though you've shared that in a confession or a blessing interview, your spouse has the right to know what you've been dealing with. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is to build a relationship of trust. You really, really want to be able to trust each other. So if you can show that you are trustable, then your potential match will be more inclined to trust you with where they're at. So building a relationship of trust is critical. Critical. Because you can't give your heart to somebody that you don't trust. So trust is fundamental to love. It's very, very important. The other thing is that if you hide something from your spouse, you're going to be worried for the rest of your days that they're going to find out that you did this and you hid it from them. That's torture. So it's very important that you share honestly, and not in the first week or 2 weeks, and definitely never in a profile, never, but in the 4th month or the 5th month, somewhere in that time period, it's important that you share the challenges that you've gone through in your life, and difficulties, the mistakes that you've made, things that you're not necessarily so proud of. So to build a relationship of trust is really important. Parents and matching supporters should keep in touch. Keep in touch with the candidates, and that doesn't mean push them. It just means be there. Everything going okay? Right? So never push, just always be there for the candidates. So candidates must fully disclose their personal history, situation, and background. I talked about that. Reaching a decision. So during the 7-month period, young people, I've heard young men and women say, I knew that I had to stick it up for 7 months, but I knew at 3 months it wasn't going to work. That is not what we mean by the 7-month period. If at any time you feel you want to end the discussion, you can do that. Talk to your parents, talk to your matching supporter, discuss it, and try to figure out why. Because you'll learn from that, and it will help you in the future as you move into the next matching discussion. And sometimes, it seems really, really difficult in a relationship, but actually it might be just the way men and women communicate, for example. So there could be some fairly comparatively irrelevant issue that you're dealing with. So if you talk to your parents, or mom or dad, whoever you're connected the most with, just share with them where you're at and why you feel this way. And then if you all decide together that the matching discussion should end, it's fine. End it at any time you feel it's important. If one says no, the parents or the matching supporter should communicate. Ideally, the candidate won't be communicating to the other candidate, I don't want to talk to you anymore, because there could be hearts involved. And we really want to protect the other person's heart as well. So parents are in the best position to share that kind of thing with their son or daughter. So it's important that parents communicate, connect with the other parents, and share that information. And if the process ends, revise the matching plan, but don't proceed again until you feel ready. So take whatever time it takes to heal or to recoup and think about the process, and then begin again when you feel ready. And if they decide to be matched, of course, then they can go ahead with the matching plan, the matching process, the ceremony. Physical closeness, I did talk about this. Holding hands is okay. A hug to greet is okay. Now, in some countries, we know that kiss on the cheek is customary, right? So be sensitive to customs, but physical closeness is really, really important in the matching discussion. So here are the things that I want you to remember. Unity, some kind of condition of unity between mom and dad and parents and children. Learning to listen, taking time to listen, communicating with each other is very, very important. And never give up. Never, never give up. Parents, this is their decision, so let the candidates take responsibility. Let them get to know each other, and when they feel ready, to make the commitment. So just a couple of points of matching etiquette, and then we'll break for lunch. So if you receive an email from another family, I talked about this morning, respond really, really quickly, but treat it with respect, with dignity. You know, if you think about it, another family contacts you to consider your son or your daughter to be matched and blessed to your son or daughter. Isn't that an honor? Wow. It is. So treat it with dignity and respect, and then respond as quickly as possible. One candidate at a time. Once you begin a discussion, it's important to communicate only with one family at a time. If you are contacted in the midst of a discussion by another family, the proper thing to do is to say, we have begun a matching discussion, and if it doesn't work out, we'll contact you. Or contact us again in a month to see if this conversation proceeds, if it continues. Okay, but only one family at a time. The way you end the process matters. Can you see the orange? You can see that part? The way you end the process matters. Don't drop off the face of the earth because you're upset or uncomfortable. Communicate honestly and respectfully with the other family or matching supporter. I was a matching supporter for a young man who recently got blessed to somebody else. But anyway, one day I got an email from the mother, and she said, we were communicating really well with this other family, and all of a sudden we haven't heard from them. I don't know what's happening. I phoned, I left messages, I emailed. It's been several weeks now and I haven't heard anything. So she contacted, the mom contacted me, because I was their matching supporter, and I contacted the other family, and it turned out that they wanted to end the discussion. So they just ended it. They just stopped. They just didn't communicate. Please don't do that. If you have a hard time communicating with another family, contact a matching supporter, and we'll help you. We'll help you communicate. So it's common sense in some sense, but it really, really is important. So the way you end the process really, really matters. So that is the communication phase, the discussion period. The 7-month period can end at any time. But this has been really fundamental in successful blessings. So we really, really encourage you to make a commitment for a 7-month period of discussion before deciding to become matched. So the commitment ceremony, the couple creates this together. If they decide they're going to be matched, they can communicate with each other and decide how to do this. They could have a really big event at the church with lots of people, or they can have just a very simple, very simple, our daughter, when we went to Brazil, they were planning this big ceremony and inviting neighbors, etc. And, they had this elaborate process worked out. And on the morning of we were going to do the ceremony, our daughter said, well, we decided we would change it. We're just going to have you pray and his dad pray, and then we'll sign the papers and that's it. Okay? Yeah, fine. So it's up to the candidate to decide how they want to do it. But what is important is to take a nice photograph as a couple, sign the paperwork, so that means mom and dad sign for both candidates, and the candidates sign, and then each candidate submits that to the BFM on their matching application. That registers them as a matched couple. So a nice photo, sign the paperwork, and upload it into the matching application. And then tell the world. But that's only if the candidates give you permission, mom and dad. I know you want to go to the top of the mountain and yell and scream and tell the world, but sometimes our kids want us to be very sensitive about this. So it's really important that we respect where they're at and what they want in the matching process. So preparing for the blessing, make growing the relationship a priority, receive the level 3 blessing education. And the level 3 is preparing to be a couple. And ideally, they'll go together to the actual weekend workshop. It's a great experience for them as a couple. And prepare financially to make the blessing offering, and then complete the blessing ceremony application once the dates for the blessing are announced. So that's the quick overview. There are just some points. This is my reminders to be sure that I cover each of these. Which blessing? So in the very early discussion with the other parents, it's important that you ask them, which blessing will your son or daughter participate in? As you know, we have Sanctuary Church, which is offering blessings now, and we've had broken hearts when one or the other of the couple is going to one blessing and the other is going to True Parents Blessing. So I don't encourage you to fight and argue and discuss, this one's better than that one. That's not the point. The point is, be on the same page. Communicate with the other family. Decide ahead of time which blessing they will go to. Okay, that's important. Parents go with their son or daughter. I talked about that. That's in the matching, when they're communicating and getting to know each other. Spiritual revelation. Sometimes, especially if we go to Cheongpyeong, spirit world is really active and alive. Sometimes we'll have a dream or a vision, and God will say, this is your match. This is the match for your son or your daughter. But if you receive a revelation like that, be really, really wise. Unless you know absolutely this is God, or this is Father, or this is the evil spirit telling you, you still need to be responsible. So do your due diligence, do all the research. Don't assume that what you're receiving is absolute. The spirit world is still being educated too. So maybe they don't know more than we know. Maybe. But we really don't know who's talking to us from the spirit world. So it might be God, but, and I want to respect that. I respect spiritual revelation, but it's just really, really important that we take responsibility. So any insights, revelations that we receive, as parents and as families, we need to be responsible. Very important. The Holy Wine. Our blessed children, this last blessing, did not receive the Holy Wine. In the past, they've always had the Holy Wine, and the reason for blessed children to drink the wine is for registration into the age of Chenogok. This last blessing, they didn't participate in. The idea is that in 2020, everybody will receive the Holy Wine again as registration into the age of Chenogok. Our first generation members all drink the Holy Wine as part of the process to eliminate original sin. So the 5 steps that will eliminate original sin, each one of those must be completed in order for a couple to give birth to blessed children. So our first generation blessing candidates all drink the holy wine as part of the purification process. So if that comes up about the holy wine, just so that you're aware, blessed children have had the holy wine in the past, and that's for the registration into the age of Chimokuk. So those are my notes, and that's it. So thank you very much. Any questions? Any questions at all? Yes?
Well, I'd like to know if it's been an issue that, people or second gen that have felt, like if they've been refused a number of times for whatever different reasons it could be, if they get disheartened by that and kind of not want to go to the blessing.
Yes.
If, how to deal with that problem in our church. Because, when Father matched us, we had matched to whoever, and we didn't pick and choose. And now it seems like a much more pick and choose kind of thing, like, a little bit more picky about, what our children get or whatever. And if that puts some people really at a disadvantage,
Yeah, it can be heartbreaking, it really can, and that's why it's important that we as parents are really connected with our son and daughter. Very often a matching discussion will break. One person is really, really in there and completely dedicated to this other person, but the other person is not. And that does happen, unfortunately. But one of the goals of the 7 weeks communication is to build a relationship in an ongoing basis, not to make a premature commitment, but to get to know each other. But all of the while, parents need to be connected with their son and their daughter to ensure that they are there if there is an end to the discussion or there are some problems that they encounter. And very often, young men and women do get discouraged. Our daughter for 6 years looking, well, that is a challenge. So parents have to really be there to support them and encourage them. Don't worry, we will find your match. We just need to hang in there and just really be committed, really, really committed. So yeah, that can be a real problem. So as we build relationships within our family with our sons and daughters, we can be there to comfort them and support them if a discussion ends. And frankly, the end of a matching discussion is not a failure. It's not a failure. One of the things Dr. Greg Baer talks about in the book that I suggested, Real Love in Dating, it should be Real Love in the Matching Process, should be the name of the book actually. But one of the things that he talks about is if a relationship ends, that's a good thing because now you know clearly it's ended and now you can prepare and move on. So a matching discussion that ends is not a failure at all. It can be a learning experience. It can be heartbreaking, but it can be a good thing because that match wasn't going to work out because the other person wasn't so committed. It's kind of hard to tell your heart, okay, heart, don't be broken, right? So as parents, it's just really important that we're there to support our young men and women in this process. And it can be heartbreaking. It can. And I don't know how exactly to prevent it. I don't think we can, we want to protect the hearts of our young people, but it's a mean and cruel world out there. So we do the sincere best we can. I don't know if that helps.
how is it looked at then if second gen go outside and bring somebody in? Is that, what is that called?
It happens more and more. You know already that, anybody heard the question? Mother blessed her 2 youngest daughters to first generation candidates. And she has said that for blessed children who are over 30, they can find a first generation candidate. They can go to the blessing, receive the blessing, and if they're both pure, with a 40-day condition at Changchun, whatever, some other conditions, they then can be considered second generation. If they've had relationships, there is a path for them too. And if they're younger, there is a path for them too. As long as families are supportive, generally we can accept that. The BFM can accept that. So this is not exclusive. We don't want people to leave our movement because we're not going to give them permission to go to the blessing. One of the things that Crescentia Degoti really is concerned about is, what does God think? What's the heart of, our Heavenly Parent in any situation or relationship? And so that's kind of the perspective that we try to look at each relationship with. So for our young men and women who found someone outside of our movement, there is a way for them. There absolutely is. And it's really important that they understand that we just really want to embrace them. Thank you for asking. Any more?